I've had the pleasure of interviewing Matt, one of the best writers of CFE 2019. Matt was one of the top 1% of all writers of the CFE, and in this interview he shares his strategies on outline cases, how to approach every single day of the exam, and he even does a live case for us to see. Matt is very knowledgeable, and there's a lot that you can learn from him. The full 30-minute interview is on my site, gevorgcpa.com. Without further ado, let's take a look. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, and then we'll just discuss how you wrote the CFE.
Thank you. So I did my undergrad in accounting, and then I went on. I did a master's degree in tax, actually, and then I've kind of been going through like the CPA PEP process for a couple of years, and then I wrote the CFE in September 2019, and I wrote the tax elective.
What was it that made you want to take tax?
I think so. Most people took assurance. I think that's obviously the most common.
Right.
Even some of the people I know that work in tax take assurance for some reason, but I think for me, my decision was easy. Like, it's just what I felt most comfortable with. So I wasn't going to jump on another bandwagon just because everybody else was. So
when you reached the CFE, was there anything that surprised you, or was it just as you expected and prepared?
Not really. So I think for the most part, most of the AOs and stuff were pretty consistent with what was on prior years. There were a couple areas where it was a little lighter or a little heavier, but I think for the most part, it was very fair.
Day 1, 2, or 3, did you find most challenging, and let's say least challenging?
So in my prep, I always thought that day 3 was the toughest just because of the time constraints, not necessarily the technical material. I think on this particular year's CFE, it was actually fairly easy and manageable from a time perspective. So that's what I was kind of most worried about, but it was okay.
I'm curious about your writing skills. Would you mind telling me if you use an outline, and if so, if it's a computer outline or a paper-based outline?
Right. So I did usually prepare an outline, but I'd say it was, less detailed than maybe 90% of other writers, if not more. I kind of just wanted to make sure I had what's the required, and if I noticed something that was a bit later in the case that I might otherwise forget, I'd jot it down. But for the most part, I didn't spend a ton of time outlining. Recently,
I was speaking with a student who also had a study buddy, and what he said is that they were actually marking each other's cases, and he found it pretty helpful. Was that the approach you took with your study buddy as well?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So we did mark each other's cases. I think most of them throughout Capstone 2, as well as, we'd ask each other technical questions, and we'd meet up maybe once a week and just go over, how we thought the cases were going, what to look out for, where we could improve.
Let's speak about case outlining. Can you describe how exactly do you outline?
Right. So I guess my general approach would be, and it's a little bit different for each day, right? But I guess in general, on all 3 days, I would always, read through the case, highlight the requireds, make sure I really understood what exactly they were asking. So like what words were kind of triggers to like do what, and what, the user would be looking for. And yeah, and I mean, like I'd read through the case, highlight things that I thought I would need to integrate, like, the vision and mission, or some of the values of the company, and some of those like strategic management type of ideas. So those are some of the things I'd look out for.
What kind of sections would you have in your outline for day 2?
Right, so usually I'd have a booklet, I guess, like this. So then if you can see that, on the one side, I would have kind of all the requireds and a few of the important points on that required. And then on the other side, I would have more like high level information. So if it's a day 2 and there's an organization chart, I'd have all the, all the companies. I'd have, okay, these are the shareholders. These are, whatever, the CFO, the controller, whoever else is mentioned in the case. Mm-hmm. So I'd have that as a quick reference to know, who I'm addressing, my answers to. And I wouldn't usually have a timeline, just because I didn't think that it would really actually help me that much. I just kind of, before I started writing too, I would always kind of take a deep breath and be like, okay, I think a little bit about the chronology, but I didn't actually find it too useful to write it down.
How would you outline a day 3 case when you're so time crunched? How would you do that?
So I'd kind of take a similar approach, I guess, but I would remove that one page that was more high level company information, and I would just have each of the requireds. And again, just a couple bullets like, okay, this was mentioned on this other page where it wasn't intuitive that it relates to this AO, just things like that. But like in terms of my outline, I'd say it was a lot less than most people. And I guess getting into like a bit further, I'd also make estimates of the amount of time that it would take me to answer each AO. So
how would you approach a day one case?
sure. So day one, I would just read the case beginning to end. When I was reading it, I'd note the requireds, I'd put them on my outline, and then, as I was reading through it, I'd add, okay, this number's on this page, look for this. Another thing I did on the day one is I'd highlight literally every single number, and when I was writing, I'd check off page one, okay, did I use this number? Otherwise, because I feel like you have a bit more time on day one where you can do that. So having that highlighting and checking them off, I'd know, okay, I used every single number, I used all the information, I'm good to go.
As you know, a lot of students will now be preparing for the May CFE and later on for the September CFE. If there's one single best advice that you could give to students who are preparing for the CFE, what would it be?
Yeah, so I would just say, you have to figure out what works for you, right? Because a lot of people try to develop this method of writing the CFE, and it's not, I don't think it's a one size fits all approach. Everyone has their own idiosyncrasies, so you have to do what works for you and you have to be confident with that. And if it's working for you on the practice cases, I think they're pretty indicative of what the exam's likely to be like. So I think that's the best approach.